Hi, Jelaine.
Hi, how's it
How are
going?
you?
I'm good.
It is National Teacher Appreciation Week.
I am overjoyed, overwhelmed. I am almost speechless.
So when it first happened, I was so concerned about devices. I even went to my school and volunteered the first 2 weeks, and I was passing out, Chromebooks.
What I've tried to do is just transmit my class as much as possible into the remote environment because our class is so powerful in the interaction.
If I ever get too down and out, I'm going to have to tune in to you so that I can get geared back up.
You would be an honored guest in my class at any point.
Sicky now. Following the COVID-19 outbreak, teachers have been forced to turn to remote and online learning to safely teach their students. And a few of them got quite a surprise from President Barack Obama on Wednesday during Teacher Appreciation Week. But during the very same week dedicated to celebrating teachers, the current White House rejected CDC guidelines that could help keep these very teachers and their students safe when schools begin to reopen. The White House called CDC guidelines on reopening establishments like restaurants and schools and churches overly prescriptive and rejected the guidelines over concerns they risked further damage to, wait for it, the economy. The economy. Donald Trump is in such a hurry to reopen. Joining me now is Dr. Richard Besser, President and CEO of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and former acting director of the CDC. Dr. Nadia Abuesalam, nursing professor at Boston College, and emergency room Dr. Rob Davidson, Executive Director of the Committee to Protect Medicare. Thank you all for being here very much. Let's start with Dr. Besser. Is it normal for an administration to oppose its own CDC's guidelines and recommendations on a health matter?
There's nothing about what's going on right now that I would call normal. CDC's role as the nation's lead public health agency is to develop guidance. And yes, guidance does get reviewed by other departments to make sure it's consistent with other policy. But you look to the government to provide guidance that is based on the best science, best public health information, and that's what states are looking for right now as they're thinking about trying to get people back to work.
And Dr. Abuesalam, the guidelines that the White House has rejected include using disposable dishes and utensils at restaurants, closing every other row of seats in buses and subways while restricting transit routes among areas experiencing different levels of coronavirus infection. That's important in places like New York City where students ride the subway, and separating children at school and camps into groups that should not mix throughout the day. And the White House's, sort of what they don't like, the revisions they want, are they're saying guidance in rural Tennessee shouldn't be the same as guidance in urban New York City. So what their objection is that they need to be customized, I guess, for how rural a community is. I don't get it. Do you?
Right. So, I mean, one primary premise of public health is one of the biggest predictors of your health is actually your zip code. Local context certainly matters. But that local context lives inside of a larger context, and that's a national context. And we definitely need national guidelines to help us understand how it is that we can reopen local contexts. I think it's a little bit short-sighted to think that local governors and state governors can be able to make the decisions without a larger amount of guidance. And everything in the CDC guidelines is absolutely reasonable and is absolutely expected to protect the public.
Yeah, I don't like playing too much Trump in this show because I think people pretty much know what he says. But let me play a little bit of him. This is him talking about the economy, the thing he cares about the most, and more deaths. Take a listen.
Will the nation just have to accept the idea that by reopening, there will be more cases, there will be more deaths?
So I call these people warriors, and I'm actually calling now, as you know, John, the nation warriors. Hopefully that won't be the case, John, but it could very well be the case. We can't have our whole country out. Can't do it. The country won't take it. It won't stand it. It's not sustainable. If somebody lost somebody, a parent or a wife or a husband or, any brothers, sisters, if you lost someone, you could never make up for that by saying, wow, you're going to have a great year next year economically. And so you can never do that. But I will say that from an economic standpoint, I think next year is going to be a very big year.
you can't make up for it by saying there'd be a great economy, but, Dr. Davidson, do you think children should be considered warriors who should risk death and risk their teachers getting sick and maybe dying just so that their parents can go back on the wheel and Donald Trump can have his great economy back that was actually Barack Obama's great economy?
Yeah, none of us signed up to be warriors in Donald Trump's battle between public health and the economy. And frankly, we cannot have an economic recovery without truly addressing the public health piece. I know here in Michigan, we have a governor who has put out a 17-page, 6-step plan. We're in phase 3 right now. All we need from the federal government is a consistent message, people wearing masks, people telling people, to stay home and to follow their governor's direction. And we need them to utilize the DPA to get us swabs and reagents so we can do the testing that is needed, which is still lacking in our state. That's all we need. Other states might need more because their governors aren't doing the great job Governor Whitmer is. But really here in Michigan, we're asking very, very minimal from the president, and calling us warriors and expecting us to sacrifice ourselves for some economy that he is dreaming that is going to recover without public health, I think is ludicrous.
Dr. Besser, you look at we have sort of on the screen the states with the most cases. You can see New York versus California. There are many, many more in New York and New Jersey. These are states that have things like the subway, where people are in close contact with each other, just getting to and for, getting, here and there. So it makes sense. People live in more confined circumstances. People live in apartments as opposed to laid out in houses. So that makes sense. Does it make sense, the White House's point of view is that because of that, the guidelines should be different in every state? Does the virus act differently in a rural state simply because people already are farther apart? Should it be different in a state that's sparse?
Yeah, I worked at CDC for 13 years and was involved in developing guidance for all kinds of things. 4 of those years were for emergency preparedness and response. And what you want to see is an overarching national strategy and plan with very specific guidance so that states will know what to do. But that will be applied differently in different states based on what's going on. So in a state that is in phase 1, which is just having 14 days of declining cases, they'll be doing something very differently than a state that hasn't seen any decline at all, or a state that's been seeing 6 weeks or 8 weeks of decline. No states are seeing that yet. But the idea is you have national guidelines and they're applied based on the local situation. I'm on the regional governors group for 7 states in the Northeast, and we're working to coordinate because things like mass transit cut across states. But what you would really like to see, rather than things being decided regionally, is a national plan that regions and then individual states can apply. And that's what this guidance from CDC was doing. It was something states were looking for, and hopefully at some point it will see light of day so that it can be used across the nation.
So what you're saying is that because the guidelines are put out and they're a single piece of guidance, that doesn't mean every state has to use them in exactly the same way. They could apply it to their own situation.
Exactly. The thing about pandemics that's challenging is that while they will hit the country, the entire nation, they don't hit everywhere at the same time. So, as we've seen, New York City has seen this in a different trajectory than say Kansas City. And you would expect New York City is doing something slightly different. It doesn't mean that at some point Kansas City isn't going to be in the same kind of predicament as New York City and will have to change. So having the national guidelines, and the CDC guidelines break it down by phase, so it would be a very useful tool.
Dr. Abuelsamid, I look at the global statistics. We have almost 1/3 of the cases on the planet. And we had on this show a couple, an American woman and her Italian boyfriend, coming to us from Italy early on. And I remember, I will never forget her saying, you guys are 2 weeks behind us. You're 2 weeks out from being where we are in Italy. And in Italy at that point, the whole northern region of Italy was completely locked down. Soon the whole country was locked down. Now they have 217,185. We have 1.2 million. Are we leaving? Are we heading out? I just heard in my ear. I think Andrew Cuomo is starting. All right. Well, we'll ask you that another time. Here's Cuomo.